And you know what? I'll do it right now. I wasn't going to start with this, but I'm going to do it now so that I don't forget. I don't know if you saw, but when I mentioned on Twitter that you were coming on tonight, Dunlop was one of the first ones that wrote back and said, one of the things I've always wanted to ask Cabbie is books that he has on his shelf, books that he's read or that he still wants to read, and maybe that you'll be reading right now that we're in quarantine and we got time on our hands. So I was going to save that for later and hit you with it later. But seeing as we're talking, Brendan Dunlop, I'll hit you right off the bat with it. Talk to me about your bookshelf and some of your favorites.
Well, that's a wonderful question. You know what? I don't know if it's going to sound lame, but my wife just instituted like a 1-hour reading
What do you have a child here? That's what I just do with my kid. Go up to bed and read for a half hour before bedtime.
Our collective screen time is at 100,000 trillion. Like people are just doing this all day. They're just,
Yeah.
So I'm reading. When I read for pleasure, I usually read magazines like 1,500 words, 2,000 words, little pieces, Esquire, Wired, Fast Company, other stuff. So I'm finishing Malcolm Gladwell's Talking to Strangers. I'm reading a book called The Wealthy Barber Returns and another book called Atomic Habits. So I'm like a third of the way through one and halfway through another and 3/4 of the way through another. So every night I'm just changing what I'm reading. And then I have a couple of Kobe's Wizenard books. So that's what I'm just going to like sink into and just read cover to cover. But I'm sorry that we're starting with like boring ass reading friggin' conversation. But yeah, what are you reading? And Brendan, if you're watching this, Brandon, you should answer the question as well. What are you reading?
You see, my wife was watching the first few minutes because she wanted to know if the buds were working as well. So I don't know if she's still watching. And I have to assume that she is, because if she is watching, I need to be honest. I don't read, dude. Like, I don't read. It's terrible. I know it's like it goes against everything that we've been taught, in journalism school and everything else. I rarely read. And the one book that I've got on the go right now that's been on the go for 5 months and I'm maybe 50 pages in is the Howard Stern book, his last book that came out, because I love reading the interviews. And so I was talking last night to Jeremy Taggart about this type of thing that we're doing right now. This is what I like most about the industry in general, whether it's sports, news, entertainment, or otherwise. I love interviews. I love conversations. So I was saying last night, when I think of interviews and some of the best interviewers, I want to be entertained, no doubt. And I'm not saying this, what's the best word for this? I'm not trying to patronize you as you sit here right here. That's part of why I love you, is because of the interviews. Because it might not be always Barbara Walters trying to make somebody cry. It's conversations and entertainment, though, and it's drawing information out of people that a lot of folks don't get. The interview you do with somebody is way different than the interview I do with somebody, and you're getting information out of people that other journalists, other interviewers don't get. And when I think of Howard Stern, forget as I said last night to Jeremy, forget the TNA and 90 minutes, a politician draw things out of people that other interviews don't. That's the stuff that I enjoy more than anything else.
Nice. Well, thank you. Thanks for mentioning that. Well, you and I have different functions. Like, you are calling a broadcast, and then when you're on Sportsnet, then you have to either interview a coach at the quarter break or interview a player after the game. So you're there strictly for information. With me, I'm lucky that my goal is to entertain first and get information second. So when I started doing this stupid segment, and then I started collaborating with my man D, with Dave Cricks, like, some ways it was hard because we had a lot of barriers to jump over and a lot of landmines to navigate through and that kind of thing. But we didn't have the burden of covering a team every day, as you do with the Raptors, or Waz, or Bruce Arthur, or Doug Smith, and then it's when a team isn't doing bad, like those, after Chris Bosh left, and even when we drafted Chris Bosh in 2003 to like 2006, like after that break between Vince Carter and then when Chris Bosh, those are some lean years. So it was like hard to cover the Raptors. But then once we got the Messiah and things turned around, it's way more fun. And being in America, I had so much FOMO when the Raptors went on a 15-game winning streak. And I'm watching in the sports book. So our Bleach Report office is in Caesar's Palace. So the games would come on like 4 o'clock, 4:30. So I'd be like, oh, let me just post up and watch the Raptors. So when I can just imagine the excitement. And I'm just reading, I'm on TSN or whatever, just looking at the comments and the posts to see, every game. It's like someone shows up or the team is still, obviously this because you're narrating, these great games. Somebody's injured. The next person is stepping up. The bench is playing amazing. So, long-winded. I thank you very much for the mention of the interviews, but you and I have different functions. So in some ways your job is harder, and then mine is also challenging because I got to come up with something creative to do every time, something that the athlete hasn't done before, and then some way to entertain the audience without people be saying oh, this sucks. So that's the tricky part too.
You're always going to get that though, right? There's always going to be somebody. There's always going to be somebody. We know that. We know that full well. All right. What I was saying as you were coming on, I am going to go back to the beginning a little bit, and then we'll get into all this stuff because I want to talk about your that's not so new anymore, but your newest gig and your latest ventures with Bleacher Report. And you're down in Vegas right now, correct? You're joining us from Vegas.
Yes.
It's snowing today, by the way, or it was snowing today in Southern Ontario and Toronto. It's like minus something right now at night, so it's ridiculous.
Is it?
Yeah. That's what I heard it too. Yeah. Anyways, when you're coming out of school, I'm not going to go into Cabral Elementary School, high school, whatever. But when you're going from Cambridge to Ryerson,
yes,
and now you're coming out of Ryerson, at what point did the idea of I want to do something different, or maybe I could do something different, when did that start to become a thought, then an idea, and then actually come to fruition? Was this something when you were in Ryerson and thinking long-term what you wanted to be in the industry, is this what it was and what you ended up doing? How did it kind of evolve for you?
This was not. I went to school with Adnan Virk, and it was Virk's dream to be a sportscaster, and Virk is one of the very best. I also went to school with a guy named Husmat Habji and a guy named RT or Randall Thorne. And we all wanted to make movies in the summertime for fun, Eric. RT and I, we were roommates, and we lived in a 1-bedroom apartment the size of probably your living room, was the whole apartment on Gerrard Street. And we would make movie trailers for fun in the summertime because we loved John Woo and Quentin Tarantino, and we're doing fake action movies. Sometimes even in the winter as well. So we wanted to make movies. And I was trying to be an actor, and I was just basically trying to do my best version of Will Smith. And I have 1% of the talent of Will Smith. So when I got to the Score, I'd been there for 3 years, just writing scripts for the host, giving them stats, and then they would add their own flourish to how they narrated the highlight packs. So it was really Steve Coolius and Lisa Bowles. I have to give them tremendous credit for saying, hey, we want to change our weekend show. We want to do this, man. We want to have a man on the street segment in our show. You should do it. And I was auditioning for commercials. I get a Tim Hortons commercial once every 8 months where I'm eating and they said when you're on the set, you take a bite of the sandwich and you don't have to eat the whole sandwich, but I ate the whole friggin' sandwich. But then we have to do 30 more takes, or it's chili in a bowl. And I was the friggin' actor who's just eating all the food. Anyway, so I was let me think about it. And then I met my cameraman, Brian Roy, and he was just fresh out of film school. He went to York University. I went to Ryerson. So we met a week later. I said, hey, B, do you want to go try something? He's like, sure. There was no real idea. I was I think I did, my first bit was about the national anthem I did a bit about mascots, and it was really terrible. I just went around. I found some people at Nathan Phillips Square. I was like, hey, what do you think about these fake mascots? And it was awful. It was when Toronto was bidding for the 2008 Olympic Games. This is 2001. And we lost to Beijing. That was the first bit. I showed it to my boss, Anthony Tichani. He's like, it's okay. Do another one. So I went out and did this thing about the national anthem, and then I got people to sing it, and I just cut it together. And then I was singing as well, and I was singing to a baby, and I made the baby cry. So when I showed that tape to my boss, he's like, this is funny. I said, well, can we start to air them? He's like, yeah. So Sunday nights, 11:55 p.m., Like, this is in a time where you had to email, like, feedback at thescore.ca. That's the only feedback we got. You probably know this because at the fan, people would call in, so you would get that immediate.
Hey, when I started at the radio station, the internet didn't exist, or at least it was just coming up. 100%. Because, dude, I was in college in the early 90s when internet was just starting, and you had to go to the lab, the computer lab at Homer College to work in the computer lab on the interweb. And like one rich dude in the residence had the internet. It was dial up, and you're getting like just like as a picture loads on the screen, And when I got to the radio station, I didn't mean to derail your story.
No, it's okay.
When I got to the radio station as an intern, we had a service called Sports Ticker, and Sports Ticker was a computer service, and I guess it was technically through the internet, but it wasn't. There was no surfing. We weren't opening web pages. Sports Ticker was hooked up to a dot matrix printer. So I'm clearly dating myself here for anybody that's like under 30. But there was a dot matrix printer set up to Sports Ticker, and it would, if you saw a story that you liked, and it was generally a story that was at least 8 to 10 hours old. Like, it would be, if somebody got traded this afternoon, like 8 hours ago, it might be on Sports Ticker now. Like, earlier today, Dodgers trade, boom, boom, boom. And like, we better get on that for the show tonight. Let's get a guest from the Dodgers on or something. Print and be.
Oh, wow.
And
I remember those days.
Yeah, and we'd go into the newsroom, and we were using the cart deck machines. Like, we're basically like 8-track. Like, if you had to load your sports update, you would go with, if you had 10 clips from various players, doing a Blue Jay story, a Leaf story, a Raptor story, a Gulf story, you would walk in with your carts like this, stacked, and you had little labels like 1, 2, 3, and you were, as you're doing your update, loading in your pulling out, because you could only load in certain ones at a time. So while you're still talking live into the mic, you got to decide, you're kind of doing this and loading your carts in to fire them off. It was crazy, man. Like, the way that the technology has changed stuff very, very quickly over the course of less than 25 years. It's insane. It's insane what we can do now versus what we were doing just 20 years ago. Like,
when you started in radio, had the Raptors team franchise been announced?
Yeah, I came in year 2. So that's where, when I started at the Fan, I was 1 year out of college, I came in right out of college as a intern and got hired immediately as a part-timer. And that was the second year of the Raptors franchise. So I told the story. I told the story last week with Elliot. Elliot Freeman was my first guest, and the reason I wanted Elliot on first was he and George Strombolopoulos were the original Raptor reporters at the Fan when I came in.
Oh, wow.
So Strombo had the hair down to the middle of his back, and was the board off late night for Spider Jones. And Spider Jones was coming on after Norm Rumack. So Norm Rumack would be on like 11 to 1 or 11 to 2. Spider would come on from like 2 a.m. to 4 a.m. Wow. And Strombo was his board op. So Strombo would go to games. Elliot would go to games. I'm this 22-year-old intern just, nipping at the heels, wanting to do something. And suddenly Headline Sports starts. And within a year, Elliot decides to go to Headline Sports. George moves on to other things as well and ends up going to Much Music. Then all of a sudden, the Fan 590 acquires the play-by-play rights heading into year 4 of the Raptors. They move from CFRB to the Fan. Swirsky and Armstrong are hired. And me and Barry Davis do the Raptors pre-ath and post for 1 year. Then Barry leaves, and I take over pre-ath and post full-time, and I was 25. Like, it was just the flurry of stuff that happened because of being in the right place at the right time. And I said to Elliot, Cabbie, you can attest to this. A lot of this, I think jobs in general, but certainly in this industry, right place, right time.
Yeah.
And I say this without a shred of arrogance or conceitedness or anything. You have to obviously prove you can do the job. And if you can't do the job, you're going to be out. But right place, right time. And had I graduated 1 year later, 2 years earlier, had Headline Sports not started, had Elliot stayed around, who knows, the fact that basketball was such a new thing in Canada and there were so many hockey guys, so many baseball guys, it was almost like, yeah, sure, go ahead, young guy, you can try this, sure, why not? Again, it would not happen today. It wouldn't have happened 5 years later had I come not just in that window at that right time. Like, it was just, everything happened kind of all at once in this perfect little window in time. But it's similar to you in some senses, I think, where you start at a young age at a network. It's a smaller network, so you're given an opportunity. But then when that opportunity presents itself and you take off and run with it, things happen in a hurry because of the work you're putting in and the attention that you're starting to receive.
Well, I'm very grateful for Anthony Ciccione, who hired Elliot, hired Cebulski, Tim, Sid, myself, Martine, Sansoni, Verk, Steve Coolius, Lisa Bowes, like there's so many, Glenn Sheeler, like there's so many of us that came from the Score. And you're right, it was a right time at right place, right time. And I think the only reason that Verk and I got into the Score is because we went to Ryerson. And the gentleman, his name is John Melville, who was the production manager, I believe, at the time. I think that was his role. He went to Ryerson too. So it was a little bit of like, oh yeah, I know that school. And man, my resume was paltry. In high school, Eric, I used to do the videos for the athletic banquet. I used to like edit them, and I put in like clips of like Ace Ventura and In Living Color, like all these shows that I used to tape. I would like you said, you have the carts. I would take these VHSs to school, sit in this little room and just like be editing till like 7 or 8 o'clock at night, take the bus home in Cambridge, and the bus came once an hour. It's not like Toronto where the bus is like every 6 minutes. That's how I started with like my love of editing and whatnot. But you're right, man. It is right time, right place is very big, very present in my early years.
Well, and part of the reason I bring that up too, Cab, is that it's pretty unique what you did in this country in terms of working for everybody. Because there are only a select few that have worked for both Sportsnet and TSN, and then for that matter, throw in the Score as well. To work for all three networks, there aren't many that have done that because of how much of obviously it is the battle with Bell and Rogers over the years. And as much as we're friends behind the scenes, it's still two competing networks. There's no denying that. And for you to have gone, from the Score to Sportsnet, back to the Score, to TSN, and now where you are stateside with Bleacher Report, that says something in itself in terms of how you were valued and what you were doing was valued, and how people were trying to find ways to find even more work for you to do, whether it be Marilyn Dennis or anything else. They're trying to find things for you to do, right?
Shout out to Marilyn Dennis. She's wonderful, wonderful lady. And I learned so much working on, it was the total opposite work culture. At the Score, TSN Sportsnet, it's like 95% dudes. And then on Marilyn's show, it is 95% women. So even like my language had to change because like I'm working with adults. I mean, at the Score, we're all like 22 to like 30. And then Sansoni was like 36. Like we're all so young, just degenerate gamblers. So I do value that experience. But you're right. Like also shout out to James Cebulski. He's the other person who's worked for the three networks, for the Score, Sportsnet, and TSN. And you know what? You'll probably find this too. I worked with like very talented people. So, I mean, at the Score, there was Tim and Sid. There's my man D, obviously my main collaborator for most of my career. And there's Verk and there's Brendan Lynch. There's a bunch of like hungry and talented people. So when you surround yourself with like other talented creators, then your work is going to benefit. So that's what happened with me, man, in many regards. And I leaned on DK a bunch of times for like, it would be like one of my favorite brainstorms we did is when the first time I interviewed Drake. And we just recorded a podcast. This is probably 11:45 p.m. And I had to interview Drake the next day. And we're just like, man, what the hell do we even ask Drake? It was when he was being announced as the global ambassador. Okay. So it was like a big deal. And shout out to Tim Leiweke, who had the vision to be like, to think big. And he's like, let me just change the whole culture of MLSE. So then DK's like, what if we just gave him business cards? I'm like, ooh, there's something there. I'm like, how many jobs does Drake have? He's an actor. He's a producer. He's a writer. He's a singer. So then DK quickly on his phone, just like whipping up these designs for these business cards. And then, Drake is doing a bit of a media tour and he's getting asked, the same 3 or 4. And that's another way that I benefited because I would never ask the standard question because I just figured that they would just get asked it all the time. So like, what does the Raptors mean to you? What does it mean? All that. So I didn't ask him any of that stuff. So I was like, I just started with, Guy, how many jobs do you have now? And he started laughing. And then when I presented him the business cards, he got such a kick out of it. And I was like, this one really connected. So that was like one of my favorite brainstorms that we just did like very quickly. And it produced a really fun moment with arguably one of the top 10 most famous people in the world.
I will say Dave was watching earlier. I don't know if he still is right now, but he was a guy that was invaluable at the Fan. And when he left the Fan, he was producing the Hoop Show, and I was working, neck and neck with him for a long time. So that was a big loss for us when he left. But there's another guy that goes from radio to TV. And I find it interesting that you guys developed that dynamic, that chemistry, and ultimately that friendship, because all the people that you're talking about, the people that you went to school with and that you started in the early years with, here's a guy coming in, and Dave's right there. Dave, big shout out to you. Here's a guy that you didn't know, and yet you come in and he's open enough to you and coming in with fresh ideas, and you're open enough to him where, hey, man, I need you, you need me, let's do something together, and to be open. Tell me about the dynamic and the relationship with producer, even to this day, and how much there needs to be that synergy for it to work the way you need it to work.
Well, it got to a point where we had kind of like, where we talked on the phone every day. And I don't know if you speak to a person on the phone every day, like literally like phone calls, not this. It's like,
yeah.
So often the first voice I would hear in the morning is DK's. And we just spent so much time together, and we were obviously always trying to churn out new ideas and just part of that grind. So there's a comfort level that develops. There's a trust level. He's got great ideas. And sometimes when I'm like trying to, this is probably like, well, okay. And I'm only comparing us in this way. When it comes to developing ideas, Will Ferrell and Adam McKay might work similarly, where Adam McKay has like 97 uppercuts, and then Will Ferrell has like a great 1-2-3 combo. It's kind of, and that's the only way that I'm comparing ourselves and the great legends of Will Ferrell and Adam McKay. So DK would have like 9 amazing ideas, and I'd have like 1. But when it came to like, all right, and because you're an interviewer as well, you have like 60 seconds. Your window is literally this, and you have to get in 2 questions, 3 questions, and sometimes the finished piece may look like I have the best relationship with an athlete,
right?
But the interaction is 4 minutes. This one time I interviewed Alex Rodriguez, and it took me like 4 or 5 times of him saying no, and then finally he said yes. So the day I'm at the Sky Dome, and he's playing for the Yankees at the time. I see him in the clubhouse. He's like, I introduced myself. He's like, I said, do you have time for a couple of questions? He's like, sure. He comes off the field after shagging balls or whatever. I was like, how you doing, man? He's like, I'm good. One more question. I was like, no, like that's just small talk, pleasantries. That was like, the actual freaking question. So I asked 2 questions, gone. The full interaction, was 57 seconds. Like it was, and Jeter, I interviewed Jeter probably once a year, once every other year. And Jeter would give me 3.5 minutes, 4 minutes max. And I'd have to milk it to make it like a 5-minute piece. So working in tight spaces was something that you have to become like an expert at, because that's all the time you get. And then being able to come up with things quickly is this shorthand that DK and I developed over the years. And we were able to come up with some cool-ish.
Let me ask you this based on what you just said, because one of the other things we got into last week when I was talking with Elliot and even Matt Devlin, even in chatting with you, I've known you long enough. I don't need to write anything down, but I never do. I never have gone into an interview ever with a piece of paper with questions written down, because I figure if I'm too busy looking at my sheet, I'm not listening, and I might miss something. I might not pick up on something. So I know in my head where I want to go, and I know where I didn't think we were going to start a conversation talking about books and what's on your shelf, and I don't know what you're going to say. So to me, it's better where you need to just kind of ad lib, and as you said, think on the spot. So when you're in those moments where you've got an athlete that maybe isn't giving you what you were hoping for, or is maybe finding, at least in this first interaction with you, perhaps it's a little awkward. He's not used to the physical contact.
Many times.
What are you doing? What's going through your mind in terms of being ready with that next question to try and not only put them at ease, but to ultimately get the content that you're hoping to get?
Panic. Panic sets in. Wayne Gretzky once told me he's like a duck. On top, he looks real calm. But under the water, he's paddling like hell. So there have been some times like that. DK just reminded me in the comments, said, you took Derek Jeter's glove once, which I did. I didn't keep it, but I took it and I wore it in an interview because I'm just so dumb and I would just do things like that. I'm trying to think of the last time where I was, where I had to, I have a Klay Thompson. This was probably December of 18. Klay was not in a good mood. They had flown from Oakland to Toronto, then practiced for 90 minutes. And, that's a 5-hour flight, 30 minutes from the airport to Scotiabank. And then
I remember this. This was that shoot around, wasn't it? I remember this.
Yes.
Yes, I do. Okay, go ahead.
And then we had a hard 5 minutes. Like Ray Ritter, the Golden State Warriors PR guy, had reminded DK a couple of times. Hard 5 minutes. So Klay, you could tell in the body language, is like, ugh. So he kind of saunters over, and he does this. He goes, I got 2 minutes. I'm just like, holy crap, 2 minutes. So I'm immediately starting to edit questions out because unlike you, I'll go in with a roadmap. I'll go in with 3 or 4 questions, and then I'll just leave some room to kind of joke around a little bit or be flexible to dive into a moment. If someone says, oh, yeah, I remember I drop kicked a guy through a window. Be like, what? And then follow that. Yeah. So it took me, so Klay was at a 1 out of 10 as far as energy goes. And I had to work so hard to get, by the end of it, he was at about a 7, but in a short amount of time. And the interview ended up being about 4 minutes. But I had to work my ass off. I had to get through everything I prepared very quick. And there were no moments where I was able to breathe and explore something because he just wasn't in a good, he was hangry. He's like, man, I've been on a plane. I'm snacking on a plane, but I just want to go to Soto, have a meal, hit up a young friend, and then, enjoy the rest of my night. And then the next day, come to Toronto, go to the gym and hit 30 points. So that was another time I got rattled. David Beckham, global icon. He's announcing that he's formed a partnership and they're getting an MLS team. So we fly to Miami. We wait for 3.5 hours to talk to David Beckham. We're just waiting in this. So we're at this theater and there's balcony. On the balcony, there's little, I don't want to call it a booth, but there's or club seating in an arena. It's basically like that. So we're waiting in one little, suite 112 or whatever it is. Beckham appears. It's the final interview of the day. We were, because TSN was a partner, a broadcast partner with MLS, we were they told us we'd get 10 to 15 minutes. But since it was the end of the day, just before I'm starting, so just little small talk with David Beckham, the PR guy's like, okay, 5 minutes. All right, Cabbie? And I'm just like, okay. And then I'm just, again, panic just washes over me. I'm so I have to reduce my questions by half. So I'm starting, and then I'm just hold it. And I'm editing on the fly, and it was awful. But I brought some props. I planned a few things. And then Beckham, by the end of it, he was into it. He didn't know what cryptocurrency was. I was like, okay. Oh, you never heard of Bitcoin?
Yeah, how does he not know?
Yeah. So, and then we got some really nice feedback from the MLS head office a couple of days later. But there are times, bro, where guys are not into it, and I have to work so much harder to get them on board and then have them enjoy themselves.
It was funny. I'm just going to tell you a quick story only because you brought up Gretzky.
Okay.
I'm supposed to be talking to you, but I want to tell this story.
No, please. Sharing is caring.
It's one of those stories from last year's finals run. I think I told it once on the radio, but I don't think I've told it since. Okay. So game 5, when KD suits up and Durant's making the glorious return. So before the game, and to be honest with you now, I'm trying to remember if I might have been talking to Crix on the floor before the game. But anyways, I'm on the floor, and I look to my left, and it's maybe 30, 35 minutes before tip-off. And Wayne Gretzky's standing maybe 20 feet to the left, and he's there early. Nobody shows up early. Even for NBA Finals games, they're walking in 5 minutes before tip. There's Gretzky hanging out
but half it's hour. Toronto, though. It's not Los Angeles or Miami.
True. So I think, all right, I'm going to go talk to Wayne and see if I can line something up for during the broadcast, because I was working sidelines that night on the Sportsnet broadcast. I didn't have the radio call. So I walk over, and Wayne was with some friend of his, and I just sort of stood there awkwardly for a second. And then I'm like, these guys aren't stopping. They don't care that I'm standing here. So I just have to push my way in. So I said, Wayne, I apologize. I got to interrupt for 1 second. And I don't think you've even ever heard this story, I don't think, or this background.
No, I haven't.
I said, Wayne, Phyllis, your mother. And he's like, yeah. I said, Sandy McLean, your Aunt Sandy, Phyllis' sister? He's like, yeah. I said, well, Sandy and Marvin McLean, my neighbors, I lived 4 doors down from them in Burlington, Ontario when I grew up. I said, so I know your cousins, Craig and Matthew. And I said, you're not going to remember this because you've met like a million people in your life. But 1982, when you came to Burlington to visit your aunt and uncle and your cousins, and I played road hockey with you, and I was your goalie while it was me and my other neighbors across the street, and we played road hockey together, and I got the picture of me with my Canadian tuxedo, no joke, jeans and a jean jacket, playing road hockey, sitting on Wayne's lap, and Wayne's wearing like gray sweats and a yellow T-shirt, and it was like a scene out of a movie. Obviously, it's 82. No internet, no nothing, obviously, way before that. Word somehow got around the streets of Burlington that Wayne Gretzky was in town, and maybe about an hour after he'd shown up, and he was playing road hockey with all the neighborhood kids. We were just out playing road hockey with Wayne Gretzky. And all of a sudden you look up, and there was like this sea of people just coming down the street. Like, I mean, hundreds of people, not even on the sidewalks, walking down the street, heading towards the McLean's house to come find why Wayne Gretzky was there. So anyways, I ended up going to the house at one point, like a year or two later, with the McLeans, because they were close family friends, and Craig and Matthew were buddies of mine in childhood, like Wayne's cousins. So we went to the house in Brantford. I've been in the basement, like I've been in the trophy den, the trophy room in the basement.
Oh, wait, you went to Wayne Gretzky's childhood house? Wayne Gretzky's childhood house,
so the house.
Oh, wow, okay.
So met Walter, met Phyllis, played baseball in the backyard with Keith and Brent and Glenn. Wayne wasn't there, but listen, they wouldn't know me from a hole in the ground right now, any of those people. But I kind of used that as my in with Wayne to hey, I don't know if you remember this. And he's like, man, I don't remember that, but clearly you know all these people. And I said, your Aunt Sandy came with a stick, one of your game-used sticks one year, and gave it to me for Christmas. And that hangs up in my office here at the house, an autograph, So anyways, can we do something during the game? He's like, no problem. Absolutely. Yes. He got hurt. KD, Durant got hurt in the second quarter, going into the commercial break. That's when I was supposed to be interviewing Wayne. Right after that commercial break. So obviously KD goes down. My job is now to follow the injury and to go to the back. I spent 75% of Game 5 in the back room, hanging outside the locker room with Doris Burke and with Ramona Shelburne, who was working on the ESPN radio broadcast. The three of us just standing there. You mentioned Ray Ritter, standing outside the Warriors locker room, waiting for Ray Ritter, the Warriors PR guy, to give us some sort of news, some sort of information. I'm seeing KD walking in and out, doctors in and out. I didn't see any of that game until maybe the last 8 minutes of the game, when suddenly it looks like the Raptors are going to win before things, went sideways. And I never saw Gretzky again because I wasn't able to follow up.
Man.
Here I am now thinking, to this day, I'm like, Wayne thinks I stiffed the guy. I didn't show up for the interview. I left him hanging, and I've never had a chance to reach out, track him down, follow up, apologize, nothing. But anyways, that's a great story. My interview got awry story. But so if it ever gets, yeah, go ahead.
2 questions. Did you get anything from Ray Ritter as far as any information, or were they cagey about not telling any revealing? Because I was at the game, but I don't remember. I think I had to see it on Twitter. And what happened. Honestly, the confirmation of his Achilles.
From what I recall, Cab, it was just a leg injury and won't return. And basically, we'll follow up after the game, and doctors will follow up. They weren't saying anything substantial in the moment, but we all kind of knew. Nobody wanted to speculate, but I mean, you see the replay, and you see it, see it snake up the back of his. Yeah. We all kind of knew, but yeah. So
what were you going to ask Wayne Gretzky?
Oh man, now you really put me on the spot. I wasn't ready for that one. I think one of the main things I wanted to ask him first off, and as you said, you've got 60 seconds, maybe you might have time for 2 questions, but I always find it interesting talking to athletes over the years that, and we've gotten away from it in today's society, I think personally, and I'm saying this even as a father, we are so focused now on kids being good at one sport. And we think, even if we don't think our kid's going to make it to the pros one day, it's, you got to play this because you got to make all-star, you got to make rep, you got to make select, you got to make travel, it's got to be AAA. House league doesn't seem to exist anymore. And if it does, it's you're only in house league. Every athlete that I've ever talked to, even to this day, the athletes will say, play multiple sports. Get acclimated to other sports. Use your body in different ways. Get away from the game, even mentally, just to get away from the game. But yet, we as parents oftentimes are just saying, no, it's got to be hockey, and it's got to be off, on land training and off ice and all of this stuff.